out here walking my dog, and I might look like I'm in a great neighborhood. I'm walking by this beautiful pond, just out enjoying the early Florida fall. And some would say I shouldn't do this, it's not safe to be out here alone walking my dog. I say I'm gonna do it anyway. And then there's others who would say, hey, you're walking your dog in a pretty well-to-do neighborhood. You don't have anything to be afraid of. To which that I say, in this very pond, a woman was murdered. Shortly after I started my job here in Jacksonville, a woman was found murdered in this pond. 2 or 3 blocks away from here, another young woman was gunned down on her way home from work at 1:30 in the morning. I also drive to work. Instead of home from work, I drive to work at 1:30 in the morning. It happened in an intersection I could have crossed just a couple blocks from my apartment. The world is a scary place. I don't argue that the world is not scary. I don't argue that fear is foolish. I fully believe that our culture's hypervigilance, our obsession with true crime, and our insistence that young women should be afraid is harming women. And I'll explain why. But first, I'm gonna go finish walking my dog. The fear of what could happen has become a prison for women. When I picture this fear, it reminds me of the district fence in the Hunger Games. This fence is not electrocuted, yet it is all-powerful. People aren't afraid of the fence itself. They are afraid of what is beyond the fence, and that is what the Capitol uses to keep the district in line. In the same way, patriarchy is using the fear of what could go wrong to keep women, our potential, and our freedom contained. The facts are simple. Crime is at its lowest rate in years. With the exception of a spike in murders in 2020 that coincided with COVID, major crime has been steadily decreasing for 18 years. Even with the 2020 spike, murder rates are a third of what they were in the 90s. You are more likely to die from heart disease or a car crash than you are from a murder. And yet, conversations warning us to be afraid in public are everywhere. The most recent poll I could find on this worry says that 34% of US women say they worry frequently or occasionally about being sexually assaulted. This poll is from 2017, and I think there are 3 factors that tie into this concern. Number 1 was the release of the Trump tapes during the 2016 presidential election. Women became all too aware of the prevalence of locker room talk. We also had the Senate confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh, where locker room talk became a hotline topic. The Me Too era. We were made more aware of how often women deal with sexual violence in all aspects of our lives. And not only do we deal with sexual violence, victims and survivors deal with a justice system that too often throws the victim under the bus and allows criminals to get away with the very worst of crimes. And I think the third factor that heightens our fear of our communities and our concerns about becoming a victim of sexual assault or of a violent crime is true crime itself. We have become all too aware of the intimate details of the very worst of crimes. So let's look at the numbers. Does our fear line up with the facts? Sexual harassment is prevalent. 80% of women report experiencing sexual harassment at some point in their lives. This includes the workplace, online, and public harassment. But I think we should consider who is actually most at risk of sexual harassment. According to Harvard Business Review, in 1997, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the U.S. agency charged with enforcing federal workplace discrimination laws, received 16,000 complaints of sexual harassment from Americans. But by 2017, that number had fallen to 9,600, a drop of more than 40% over 20 years. Younger women are less likely to report harassment today. In the past, women in their 20s and 30s reported far more harassment in the workplace than their older counterparts. Today, women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s all report harassment at about the same rates. Proportionately, the biggest decline in sexual harassment is among teenagers. That group has seen a drop of nearly 75% in sexual harassment claims over the last 2 decades. But there is one demographic of women who continue to see high rates of harassment in the workforce. At the peak of sexual harassment claims in mid-1996, the EEOC was receiving more than 200 complaints per month from white women and 50 complaints per month from African American women. In 2016, there were about 60 complaints per month from white women and about 50 per month from African American women. This data suggests that the steep decline in sexual harassment claims made to the EOC left behind African American women almost entirely. The authors of this study draw this conclusion from the data. Sexual harassment in the workplace is an expression of power, a way for men to assert their dominance. The shift from sexual harassment of white women to African American women indicates that harassers are conscious of power relationships, and they choose to target the most vulnerable women in the workforce. Sexual harassment hinges on a power dynamic. As the public becomes more educated on the consequences of harassment, as young women are more empowered via education in their communities, harassment decreases. Being afraid in public does not diminish your chance of harassment. In fact, it only empowers those who will harass you. Women throughout history have dealt with this. Hiding, being anxious, or being overly cautious does not protect you. In fact, hypervigilance will only cause further harm, not only for your physical well-being and safety, but for your mental health as well. I read an opinion piece from a writer in Gawker that spoke to my feelings on true crime and our heightened sense of awareness when it comes to our safety in public. I'm going to quote 2 lengthy sections from this piece, but I think everyone should read it in full. The reason I want to read it in full is because the writer expresses herself in a way that speaks volumes more than I can in any YouTube essay video or even any private conversation I could ever have. I'm not oblivious to violence against women. On the contrary, I am intimately familiar with it. I've written and spoken extensively about my own attack when I was stabbed multiple times by a stranger while walking my dog. But anecdotes aren't data, and the fact remains that statistically what happened to me is incredibly rare. That didn't stop multiple tabloid magazines from emailing me after it happened, asking for interviews. When I looked them up, I found articles devoted almost exclusively to crimes against white women, with titles such as "My boyfriend killed and ate his secret lover," and "My hubby's killer was hiding in the wardrobe." The covers are splashy, sensational, the message clear. Danger is all around you. This isn't new, but what used to be contained mainly to supermarket checkout shelves is now everywhere. On our TVs, on our computers, in our ears. You're in danger, says the new Netflix documentary. Someone could be outside your door right now, warns the neighborhood surveillance app. This dead white woman thought she was safe, chirps the cheerful podcast lady. That message is one that I now have to fight back against, my brain determined to lie to me. Hypervigilance is a common symptom of PTSD, a trauma response that constantly puts your body into fight or flight mode. I've had to tell myself that it's okay to have someone walking a few steps behind me, that no one is waiting for me to let my guard down. In the first few months after my attack, I would panic hearing someone at my back. I bought a personal safety device, something that I could press to send a loud alarm that's supposed to scare attackers off. Once my car keys fell out of my pocket, and the noise might as well have been a gunshot, the way I reacted. It got easier the more I went out, but it took me half a year to be able to go for a walk with my earbuds in again. All these things, constantly looking behind you, carrying a safety device, always being hyper aware, these are not normal ways to live. It is not healthy, and it's certainly not sustainable. And yet I see women proclaiming that this is necessary, that this is the way you need to move through the world as a woman. I see women choosing to live the way I'm fighting to overcome. You're more likely to be assaulted by a person you know than a random stranger in public. Perhaps this is why I roll my eyes at the constant messaging to me as a woman to take more steps, to be more afraid, to be extra cautious in public. Because for me personally, it wasn't a random stranger that attacked me. My life was forever altered by a family member, by someone who assaulted me nearly daily for 3 years while my relatives chose to cover up his crimes. I often joke that I'm not afraid of what a random stranger can do to me. In my mind, I survived hell. If the worst happens and I end up as a eulogy in a news headline about a random criminal attack, I don't really care because by that point I would be dead. Sometimes my friends think I'm a little too flippant, and I think they might be too afraid because crime is random. No one is a perfect victim. No one can take enough protections to save themselves from a random criminal. And the idea that we can protect ourselves only causes us to judge and scorn those who have not been able to. Again, from the writer of Gawker, "Stay sexy, don't get murdered" is the tagline of one of the most popular true crime podcasts, as if being murdered is a choice a woman makes or a risk that can be avoided if we're just smart enough. Women aren't stupid. We don't walk down dark alleys alone while wearing stilettos and lamenting loudly about how no one would miss us if we disappeared. We all take precautions, except for me sometimes. We lock our doors and let our friends know where we're going. Be aware of your surroundings and don't trust strangers is not particularly helpful advice for someone to avoid the scenario in which women are most likely to actually be murdered by their own partner. It's victim blaming dressed up in empowerment. No one questions someone killed in a car wreck, but if a woman is murdered, her story becomes a precaution. Perhaps it is easier to victim blame than to reflect on the societal changes that need to be made to prevent violent crime. because no individual action will save you. You cannot protect yourself from the mentally ill, the unhoused, the traumatized. In fact, the cultural attitude that those groups are inherently dangerous creates stigmatization that only harms the most vulnerable in our society. Perfect love casts out fear. If we truly loved our most vulnerable neighbors, if we saw them as humans with the same emotions, needs, and vulnerabilities as ourselves, perhaps we wouldn't be so afraid of our neighbors. And if we weren't afraid of our neighbors, maybe we'd be better advocates for our neighbors, because our neighbors need us. While crimes against white women have fallen, there are people in our community who are most at risk. Over the last 18 years, over 1,700 acts of violence have been committed against unhoused individuals, though the actual number is probably much higher. While 1 to 3% of the general youth population reports sexual assault, 21 to 42% of youth who are homeless have experienced sexual assault. According to the National Runaway Switchboard, about 40% of the 1.7 million runaways and homeless youth in the country identify as LGBTQ+. Young people who identify as LGBTQ+ are 7 times more likely to be a victim of violent crime than their straight peers. I didn't include this in the script, and I'm reading the script today because this topic matters so much to me that I don't want to say something wrong. But I do want to emphasize that Black women are more likely to be a victim of violent crime than white women. All women are much more likely to be a victim of domestic violence than a random criminal attack. Instead of empowering women with the resources they need to leave a violent partner, to leave someone who is threatening their personal safety, instead of giving women those resources, we spend our time telling women to be afraid. That is not helpful for someone who is in a situation that they cannot leave someone who is threatening their life and their safety. Random acts of violence do happen, but they are random. The threat to most women is not a random act of violence, but it is very much a threat of someone we know harming us. The abundance of true crime targeted especially at white women is making us overlook those most at risk. But it's not in the interest of those who push fear-mongering to actually do the work of preventing violent crime. It's easier to create fear and keep women bogged down with fear than empowering us as a society to prevent crime itself. True crime is spiking our brains. You wouldn't drink an uncovered drink at a club, so why would you actively consume media that makes you more vulnerable? There's only one winner when we're afraid of our own communities, and it is not women. Think about who profits the most by us being afraid of the prevalence of violent crime and by being afraid of claiming our space in the public square. Women have fought for so long against sexual harassment, against violence from our intimate partners, against the notion that we need men to protect us. It honestly hurts and scares me to see so many women swallow the idea that we aren't safe in public hook, line, and sinker. When I was a child, my father told me, "You will never be allowed to go out in public without a guardian. You will always need a male protector with you at all times because you are vulnerable. You will be harmed if you are in public without a male guardian." Whenever I see a woman ask me, "Why do you feel comfortable solo traveling?" or "Don't you feel uncomfortable walking your dog in a city that has a large unhoused population?" When I hear those kind of questions, I hear the patriarchal, controlling voice of my father. These women, these friends who are concerned for my safety, they don't intend to echo the conservative, controlling narrative of my father, but I hear it still. Because the idea that I'm not safe without a protector does not serve me, and it doesn't serve my friends, my neighbors, or my community. It only serves those who want to take away the power that women have claimed in the public square and give it back to the men who think that women need a protector in order for women to be safe in public. And the reality is, those who claim to protect us are often those who we are at most risk from. Thanks for watching this video. As you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about the subject, hence the script. And I tried to speak with as much grace as I can for the real fear that a lot of people have for their personal safety, while also acknowledging that that fear is often founded on the mythos that we are unsafe in public and that true crime is a direct threat to many white women when it is in fact not. So if you appreciated this video, let me know in the comments. Feel free to disagree, but please don't disagree in a way that is hateful or personally attacking me, that would be fantastic if you don't do that. And I'm linking all the sources that I used in this video in the comments. There's several dozen, like half a dozen articles that I pulled from. I highly recommend that you read the Gawker article on true crime in full, because it is so well written and such a personal story of a woman who fought hard to overcome the very fear that was created by an attack on her personhood and her safety, and how she has reclaimed her place in the public square. So I highly recommend it. It is a really compelling read. And if you want to support me and support more content like this, I do have a Substack where I try to publish once a week and where I share more thoughts like this in other topics. So I would love to see you over in my Substack, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see y'all next time. See ya.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.